All right, welcome to another edition of the College 12 Pack. I am your host, Patrick Hahn, Senior Editor, College Wires. With me, as always, Tyler Natuno, LSU Tigers Wire. Tyler, can we pat ourselves on the back real quick for nailing the College World Series matchup? It was kind of chalky, but we nailed it. Texas A&M versus Tennessee. That's going to be a good matchup, and we're going to get into it here shortly. But I think before we need to set the stage, right, Tyler? We need to set the stage for what transpired over the last week plus with when it comes to college baseball and the College World Series. So let's start in bracket one, and really, this is where we saw most of the ACC teams that were involved. 3 of the 4 were in this bracket, and got to tell you, they were a disappointing bunch when it came to trying to knock the SEC off their pedestal. They did a poor job. Florida State got close, but close does not count when it comes to winning baseball games. In game one, North Carolina takes on UVA, beats them 3-2. Really, I don't have much to say on this game. It just felt very. I mean, we've kind of seen this before because the ACC beat each other up, but uh, I think more than anything, what we saw was ACC beat up on each other, but they just didn't have the guns when it came to playing against the big dogs. And just run that through real quick. Game one, UNC wins that game. Texas wins game, or I'm sorry, Texas. I put UT in my notes, so I said Texas. My apologies. Tennessee knocking off Florida State 12-11. And then Florida State knocks out Virginia in game 5. Tennessee beats North Carolina. Florida State beats North Carolina only to lose again to Tennessee in the elimination game 11. Anything stand out to you when you look at this bracket on what exactly transpired?
Well, I mean, so it was a really, I mean, to me, I think those first 2 games in that opening round were about as exciting an opening round in Omaha as we've seen in a while. Seeing walk-offs in both games, the UNC UVA game. I said on the podcast last week when we previewed it, like, expect some fireworks here. We did not get fireworks. It was a pitching duel, but it was still pretty exciting at the end. And then that Tennessee FSU game was absolutely off the wall. I mean, you saw Christian Moore hit for the first cycle in the College World Series since like 1956 or something along those lines. He went 5 of 6 in that game, hit a double also that ended up ultimately becoming the game-tying run as Tennessee ended up coming back and walking it off in the 9th inning. So, beyond that, though, it wasn't that exciting, to be honest with you. I thought, Virginia didn't really have much for FSU in the elimination game. Neither did North Carolina in the subsequent elimination game. FSU kind of took care of business pretty easily in those. And, we were excited, I think, for that semifinal matchup between Tennessee and Florida State after how good that first game was. But the second one just, really wasn't. Tennessee overpowered them. I think we saw which team has the deeper pitching staff, even though Florida State has probably the best ace of any team that made it to Omaha in Jamie Arnold. I think we really just saw how talented Tennessee is in that game, and they didn't really have many issues as they dispatched them and moved on to the College World Series final.
Yeah, when you look at a team like Tennessee, and we're going to get more into them in a little bit as we kind of preview this championship, but when you look at Tennessee, 1 through 9, they can all hit. Like, you try to find the weak link and try to take care of a lineup that way, but it feels like Tennessee up and down, led by Christian Moore, is really just a fantastic lineup 1 through 9. They're going to be tough to beat. Obviously, we've seen it this year. But yeah, I agree with you. I think there was like a level of excitement. Like, could they force another game and just get that deciding game? And it just wasn't to be because Tennessee did what they've done all year long, just overpower teams and just take it. They're to me, it's like they're a will breaking team. They just break your will eventually. And then that's when the floodgates usually open. Moving over to bracket 2 again. I mean, we only saw one ACC team over here, but they didn't have much of a chance. North Carolina State was a team that we thought maybe could make some noise the final year of their head coach, final swan song, but they went out with a whimper, losing 5-4 to Kentucky. Texas A&M took care of Florida 3-2 in Game 4. Florida then knocks out North Carolina State in Game 7. Texas A&M beats Kentucky in Game 8, 5-1. And then Florida absolutely blasted Kentucky out of the tournament with that 15-4 onslaught, and then lose 6-0 to Texas A&M in Game 12. Gators get knocked out. Again, another one of those games that we were hoping to push it to that third and decisive game. Didn't happen. And so bracket 2 wraps up with Texas A&M winning. Overall, Texas A&M did what they've done this year. Their pitching was outstanding, timely hitting. But man, I tell you that 15-4 onslaught really took me by surprise. I thought they would beat Kentucky in that game just because of how Kentucky's played in recent weeks. But I didn't see that one coming.
Yeah, I mean, I think looking at this side of the bracket, I think, we'll get into our picks later and who we think is going to win this final series. But I mean, hard not to be impressed with the run A&M went through this side of the bracket. Obviously exciting first round over here too. We saw Kentucky walk it off in extras with a walk-off home run in Game 1, and then A&M playing by the skin of their teeth in that Game 2, got delayed 4 hours, didn't start till past 11 p.m. Eastern. That was a late one, and Cade Kurland hit a ball to the wall at the end, would have given Florida I believe a 1-run lead in the top of the ninth. Jace Laviolette for A&M just had the snag of the century, keeping that one in the ballpark. So that was really impressive, and they ended up holding on to win in a game where they really just made Florida's lineup struggle. And then, Florida works its way through, despite in that first elimination game against NC State, Caglione only went 1 inning, kind of struggled, and the velo wasn't there. I think he was having some arm discomfort, so they had to pull him, ended up winning anyway. And then obviously that Game 2, that second elimination game, they just blasted Kentucky. I mean, that one was over before it started. Brady Donay, the a-hole hitter, hit a grand slam in the bottom of the first, and that was all she wrote. So, I think they didn't have enough in that semifinal against A&M. It was honestly, because we saw the same pitching matchup replayed from that Game 1. Those guys were both rested and started again. Played out pretty much the exact same way. Florida's lineup just did not have it in that game. They struck out way too many times. They could not make contact, and they got shut out as A&M's moving on. So I think, not the most exciting run to the College World Series final we've seen here, but I think sets up for a very interesting series.
But it also shows you just how good A&M's pitching staff has been. They allowed just 3 runs in those 3 games, outscoring opponents 14-3. Their offense wasn't like overwhelming, but they did enough. Despite not having Braden Montgomery, really had tip to what Schlossnagle has been able to do with Texas A&M this year. And while they're setting up for an opportunity to win their first national championship in college baseball. So it's going to be a historic ending, whoever wins this one. But it's great to see, some fresh blood in there and not seeing the same teams over and over. So let's talk about our most surprising aspect, Tyler, when it came to the College World Series. And I'm gonna start it off just because I kind of alluded to it earlier. I have to say the ACC was my most surprising when you look at the fact that they were 0-4 against the SEC, got outscored 35-21 in those games. We thought this is how it might go because of just the power that the SEC brings, and the ACC it could not keep up. So I think it was more surprising that they didn't win a game. They didn't win a single game against the SEC. And I really thought their best opportunity might be against Kentucky just based on how they played. And it was close, 5-4 game, but ultimately it was ironically enough, NC State lost by identical 5-4 games to get bounced in the first round.
Yeah, it's tough. I think the SEC has for so long just kind of stood in a tier of its own in college baseball. And I think you're seeing the ACC start to close that gap a little bit. I think, the top of the ACC is very, very good. And it's as good, I think, as the top of the SEC is, but it's still not quite there. And I think this kind of proved that the SEC sort of remains the benchmark as far as college baseball conferences go. And I mean, when you look at the recent history, with an all SEC final this year, it guarantees it's going to be the 5th SEC national champion in a row. And it would be the 6th of the last 7, I believe, that the SEC has won. So, I mean, I think it's pretty clear that it's this league and then everyone else. When you got a league that's, sitting at 14 teams, only 3 of them didn't make the NCAA tournament field. And now you're adding 2 more teams that also made the NCAA tournament in Texas and Oklahoma. Like, I mean, this is still, this is still the league that everyone compares itself against. And I don't see that changing anytime soon, even though the ACC and even the Big 12 a little bit are closing, although the Big 12 is about to take some losses. So.
Yeah, it is tough, but when it comes to football and it comes to baseball, SEC is where you want to be, and there's a big reason why Oklahoma and Texas wanted to join over there. Obviously, you're going to play the best of the best, and if you want to be taken seriously, that's where you want to play. Not surprising. We'll kind of see how those 2 add to it next year, but it's going to make for a lot of fun baseball, I think, in 2025 when we get around to it, adding those 2 teams in. All right, so your most surprising, it might be that logo that's just above your right shoulder there. Is that where you're going with the Florida Gators here?
Yeah, I'm gonna go homer mode for a minute here because I mean, like, look, I'll just reiterate, like, this is a team that so many people didn't think even belonged in the tournament in the first place, and they got in, and all they did was play the best baseball they have all year by an insane stretch and made an incredible run. I mean, if you had told me watching this team get swept by Missouri or drop their first 2 to South Carolina back in April, like that this team reached the College World Series semifinal, I would have never believed you. I would have never believed you. And I mean, I still, I said last week, they were the preseason number 2 team and you're kind of starting to see that talent come together. I think that's true to an extent, but like this team probably shouldn't have even been the preseason number 2 team. Like this team is so flawed in a lot of ways. The lineup outside of Caglione is very inconsistent. The pitching struggled all year long. And those things just came together at the right time. The pitching was fantastic all the way through the tournament, even back to the regionals and super regionals. Looking at guys like Brandon Neely, like Fisher Jameson, just playing the best baseball of their careers this last month. And, the lineup had, guys like Ashton Wilson stepping up too. It just ran out of steam at the end, honestly, because the pitching was great in Omaha this week, I thought. They didn't have enough, on offense against really just in those 2 games against Texas A&M. They just couldn't do it. But, I mean, I think, it's hard not to be just so impressed with Kevin O'Sullivan in this program, just the level of consistency, getting back to the College World Series, getting back to the semifinal, making it 9 out of the last 14 years. I mean, I think Florida's the gold standard in college baseball right now.
Yeah, I could see that, and I see where you're coming from with that Florida team. I mean, I think, there is that level of surprise, but it's almost, it was very reminiscent to the first college football playoff with Ohio State. There were a lot of people who didn't think Ohio State needed to be there. They were on their 3rd quarterback. Now, obviously, Florida didn't win the title to kind of match that, but that's what, you get in and then see where you go. Kind of like the NFL playoffs. All you got to do is get in, and you never know. You might end up in the Super Bowl winning it all. And really, Florida did a fantastic job. And, yeah, you talked about the lineup outside of Caglione. You talked about the pitching was really bad this year. I mean, if you really looked at the numbers, I think every pitcher had a really high ERA. So, they had to outslug teams. And when you have an inconsistent lineup, that's how you go pretty much 500 for an entire season. But yeah, you had to hats off to Sully and the job that they did, and looked like he's been pretty busy since they got eliminated and building the roster for next season. So Florida's going to be fun to watch again next year, and a team we're probably going to be talking about when we start talking baseball next December and into the off season for football. Let's talk disappointments, Tyler. I'm gonna let you lead us off here. Who is your biggest disappointment in the first round or early rounds?
Yeah, to me, it was Virginia, a team when we talked about last week, who we thought could win. We were both, I think, kind of in agreement that Tennessee and Texas A&M were the favorites. And then after that, I sort of said, there's this Kentucky team that's been playing really well. How will they handle their first trip to Omaha? Well, we learned not that well. And then there was a Virginia team that, I mean, I thought, had dark horse potential because of just how many times they've been there under Coach Brian O'Connor. Like, this is a team that knows how to win in Omaha, and it just didn't work out for them this time. They go 0-2 barbecue. and really just don't look like they have it. Offensively, the bats in that first game, the pitching was good in that first game against North Carolina, really pacified a good Tar Heels lineup, but they didn't have the offense, and they ended up dropping that game, and then just really had nothing in that elimination game against Florida State. I mean, it was 7-3, I think was the final, but they were down 7-0 for a lot of that game. They fell behind early and never had it. So, pretty disappointing showing against a conference rival, when you're, a team that went in last year, and I think they went 0-2 last year also, but played a couple of very, very tough games. So, I expect a little bit more from them. I know they were the 12th seed, the lowest of the national seeds that made it to Omaha, but I kind of thought they could do a little bit more. I liked them a little more than North Carolina.
Yeah, and unfortunately, like you talked about, they lose that game and they're outscored 10-5 in their 2 losses. Ironically enough, the team that I'm going to talk about got outscored 10-5 in their 2 losses. Is my biggest disappointment, and you alluded to them, was the Kentucky Wildcats, a team that they win the first game against North Carolina State 5-4, and then ultimately losing to Texas A&M and Florida. Really, just absolutely just weren't there. I never felt like they were in those games. You talk about a Kentucky team, like through the regular season, they were 22-8 in the SEC. 46-16 overall. Then they get to the SEC tournament, and LSU blasts them 11-0 in that opening game, and then they lose to South Carolina 6-5 to get eliminated. They did sweep their regional, but looking at Western Michigan, Illinois, Indiana State, not teams that I really thought were really going to give them much of a fight, and they didn't. You get to the Super Regional, they play Oregon State, who gave them a fight in game 2, but game 1 wasn't close. It was 10-0 win. And then they get to the College World Series, and then we saw what happened. Looking at those matchups, and I misspoke. I said 10-5. It was actually 20-5. I don't know why I messed up my numbers there, but they absolutely got owned by Texas A&M and Florida. For a team that was great all season, but once they got into the postseason, I just did not have the same confidence in them, especially after what LSU did to them. And LSU did go to the SEC championship game in a close loss to Tennessee, but still, I felt like Kentucky should have won that matchup, and they weren't even in it.
Yeah, I mean, I would have been surprised, I think, if Kentucky had come out of this bracket, just for the reasons that we've talked about. But I did think that this team was built pretty well for Omaha success. Like, they are not, a huge slugging team, which, maybe hurts you in the regular season. But when you get to Omaha and you're playing in that big ballpark, that it's, a pitcher-friendly park, a park that it's hard to hit home run balls unless you've got the wind working in your favor. I thought that would be pretty conducive to Kentucky's style of play. And it just didn't work out that way. They got great pitching in that first game against A&M. That was a 0-0 tie, I think, well into the 6th inning or something like that, before A&M sort of broke it open. But they got a great start out of that game on the mound. And then, in game 2, though, or not game 2, but I should say, but the elimination game against Florida, I mean, that one was just over before it started. Like I said, I mean, you just ran out of pitching, at that point. I think it was pretty clear they just didn't have it. So, I mean, to me, I think they showed that they didn't have the pitching depth to make a run in Omaha. And then also, even with the bats not being power centric, I was just a little bit disappointed by the lack of production overall in these games from them.
But I will say this, despite the disappointment that they showed in Omaha, you have to like the trajectory of the program given where they were 3 years ago. Just absolutely complete. It's a day and night of where they were, where they're going. But I think, if you address that pitching staff, maybe get a bat or two via, transfer portal, or you sign a guy. I think that they can definitely get up there, get back up there and compete in Omaha. Like you said, it's a big ballpark. You're gonna need some arms, so potentially adding to that rotation, and I think moving forward they're gonna be okay. But now we're gonna get into the meat of what we wanted to talk about. We're talking about the College World Series final, the best of 3. Last year we saw Florida and LSU go at it. This year it's Tennessee versus Texas A&M. So Tyler, tell me about Tennessee here, because I know that was your pre-College World Series pick. So I'll let you have the floor on that one.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't really going out on that much of a limb there. I think this has been the best, most consistent team in the country pretty much all year. If they win the championship, they will be the first SEC team to finish the year with 60 wins, I believe, according to our own Dan Harrelson over here on the College Wires. So I think that, they have, we don't see number one seeds win this tournament very often. It's kind of become a bit of a curse to be the number one overall seed. I think they got a really good chance to do it, though. I mean, they've only lost one game to this point in the tournament. It was kind of a weird one in that super regional to Evansville. I don't really know where that one came from, but they responded pretty well the next day and won game 3 to punch their ticket to Omaha. And they haven't really looked back here. I mean, we talked about, I think they have the best lineup in the country, and they were red hot, looking at guys like Christian Moore. But I mean, it wasn't just him, Blake Burke, Billy Amick, like all those guys are playing well right now. And I think they're probably the hottest team, coming in right now. Obviously, two teams that haven't lost in Omaha to this point. But the way they rolled, I think they're going to be tough to take down.
Yeah, you 58 wins. All they need is one to set the all-time record, which was set by 1986 Arizona Wildcats, who won the national championship that year. They won the College World Series. So that's setting a pretty high mark when you look at it. Talking about they need just one win, but I think 60 might be a threshold that we might not see for some time, considering it's been almost 40 years since somebody's gotten to 58. But yeah, I think you look at the lineup we've talked about. We talked about Christian Moore, who this year he's slashing 385, 460, and 1276 with 33 homers and 73 runs batted in. I think that's the guy that A&M is going to have to find a way to neutralize. And then Xander Sechrist, talk about his 3.2 ERA. I think he's only allowing like 1.2 walks and hits per innings pitched. So he's a guy who's not easy to get to. So they're going to have a tough time talking about A&M there, but I think those are the two guys that will really set the stage for this matchup when it comes to trying to secure that College World Series championship. And then on the flip side of that, we have the Texas A&M Aggies, who was my pick. Again, I really went out on a limb when I picked Texas A&M, who's been among the best 3 teams in college baseball all year long. Kind of felt like Tennessee and A&M just kind of flip-flopped, but who was going to be number 1, who's going to be number 2. You had Arkansas in there for a little bit. Looking at this team, they're 52 wins, nothing to sneeze at. They didn't have as good a record in SEC play, but 19-11 is still, again, not bad considering, who they have to play week in and week out. We saw this team sweep their regional and sweep their super regional. Now the super regional was exciting because you had some high scoring games against Oregon, but I never felt like they were in doubt. And then they swept right through the bracket too with wins over Florida twice, over Kentucky. I think because of their pitching staff, I think that's how they win this series. If they're going to beat Florida, if they're going to beat Tennessee, I don't know that it's going to be an out-slugging them type deal. I really think that their pitching staff, timely hitting, kind of the way that they've gotten here. They do have the bats. Obviously losing Braden Montgomery is a massive thing. But Jace LaViolette, he's a guy who can slug with the best of them. 28 homers this year, led the team. But for me, it begins and ends with Ryan Prager. Just his ability to really get out of jams. As good as Sechrist was with his 1.17 whip, Prager's actually better with a 1.01 whip. So we could see a pitching duel matchup in this series, and I think that's how Texas A&M wins the series if they do win it, and that's why.
Yeah, I think despite the seeding here, you could definitely make an argument for A&M being the favorite coming in. They're arguably the even more hot team right now. Like you mentioned, they haven't lost yet in the postseason. They had couple close calls against Oregon. Like Oregon gave them some games, but they ultimately won both of them and have looked pretty solid in Omaha so far. No real scares aside from that Kate Kurland near home run in game one. But since then, they've been, firing on all cylinders, and they've been doing it without their best player in Braden Montgomery, who's obviously sidelined for the rest of the year with an ankle injury. So, not having your top 10 MLB draft pick and it not really slowing you down is very impressive. And I think just a testament to how talented this team is outside of him. There's a reason they've been ranked so high all year. There's a reason, they've made it this far in the tournament. They're loaded. And, you mentioned Ryan Prager, a guy who's also one of the better pitchers that was in Omaha. He's been good. And then also, how about Justin Lampkin, the guy who has kind of struggled this year, but in those 2 games against Florida, man, they literally, not only could they not hit him, they could not contact him. I mean, he had 9 strikeouts in that last game last night. I mean, if he's pitching like this and they can go to, Prager in game 1 and maybe get him back for a game, if it goes to game 3, it's hard not to feel like they have the pitching advantage here. I think the question is, do they have the offensive firepower if they get deep into this, if these teams get deep into their pitching staffs, do they have the offensive firepower to match what Tennessee is going to be able to do without Braden Montgomery? I think that question has not necessarily been answered yet in Omaha.
Oh, absolutely. I agree with you 100%. Like I said, if they get into a shootout type of series with Tennessee, I'm going to have to go with the balls just because I think 1 through 9, they just have their lineup is unbelievable. When you talk about trying to slow them down, that's where it's tough. But I think ultimately this tournament played out the way that we always want. We want the 2 best teams going at it, right? If you look at last year, we got it with LSU versus Florida. Those were clearly the 2 best teams in baseball, and we got some entertaining baseball. That last game was a blowout for the win, but I think leading up to it, we had exciting baseball the way through. And that's why I'm excited about this final, watching Tennessee versus Texas A&M. I don't have a dog in the hunt, so I can actually just sit down, enjoy the games, and be, as somebody who just loves baseball, that's what I'm most excited about, considering the team that I root for didn't even make the postseason. So I'm going to get to sit down and enjoy some baseball. But as we talk about this Tennessee-Texas A&M matchup, we've talked about it. I'm going Aggies based on pitching performance. So my pick, I'm going to take the Aggies in 3.
Okay. I mean, I can definitely, like I said, I think there's an argument to be made, and I think that argument centers around the pitching. I think that my main hang up with picking this Texas A&M team is looking at who they've played to get to this point in Omaha. It's a Kentucky team that, has some good hitters on that roster. Do not misunderstand me, but they do not slug like Tennessee can. And I think handling them is a totally different question to handling Tennessee. And then you look at the Florida team that they had to beat twice. Like, outside of Jack Caglione, they have talent. There are guys that can hurt you, but I don't think there's anyone in that lineup outside of Jack Caglione that you're afraid to pitch to. A lot of guys that have very high strikeout rates, guys that chase stuff, I think can really be fooled pretty easily. You're not going to get that lucky with this Tennessee lineup. They're just way too good. So my hang up in A&M is, I think while the pitching has looked very good, I don't think they've been tested nearly to the extent that they have been, or that they will be in this series. So for that reason, I think I'm going to go Tennessee in 3 games.
And honestly, these 2 teams have only met once this year, and Tennessee won that game, 7-3, I believe, in the SEC tournament. So, they've kind of seen them, but we'll see with all the marbles, with it all on the table, who walks away. As you heard it right here, just like I picked before the tournament started, I'm going A&M. Tyler is going Tennessee. But I want to close out the show talking a little college football. I feel like we need to get this in there. Tyler, I have a question. What do you think about next year in the AllState 12 championship? Who's going to be playing Utah versus Oklahoma State? I don't know. And if you're not aware of what we're talking about, it was recently reported that the Big 12 is considering dropping the name Big from their conference and opening it up to the highest bidder. I mean, we have stadiums with corporate sponsors. Why not a corporate sponsor? You know, conference. I'm like, if you're going to do the SEC, I thought that Brett McMurphy of Action Network put it best. Waffle House, right? Waffle House SEC. You can just boom, it's all there, right there. It fits perfectly. But I think AllState 12 is interesting, and then obviously the Conference USA is potentially partnering with the company that has their name on the Texas Rangers stadium, Globe Life Conference. Globe Life. I don't know how that works. It doesn't really flow the way Conference
The
USA
Globe
does.
Life Conference.
The
Well,
Globe
you don't
Life.
think that doesn't come off the tongue easily? The Globe Life
Globe Life
Conference.
USA Conference. I don't know how you work that in. I just feel like we've talked about there's been reports of corporate sponsoring logos on your field, generating revenue. I think this is just another avenue to paying players. You bring in more revenue, that way you can pay out players. I really don't know how I feel about it one way or the other when you talk about the naming. But it feels like this was coming. This is a long time coming, ever since NIL was kind of introduced.
Yeah, I think what you said just now is kind of the bottom line here. Like I think this is typically something where like my reaction would be like, oh, look at this, like more corporate greed from these schools, like just trying to maximize, as much money as they can. To be honest, I don't really think that's a fair assessment of this situation, because like at the end of the day, if this settlement that we've talked about before comes through, schools, at least at the top, are going to have another $20 million they have to find in the budget somewhere to pay these players. And these schools have a lot of money, but that's not chump change, especially not on an annual basis. Like that is a lot of money you're going to have to find. I mean, a lot of schools just won't be able to, but even the ones that do are going to have to kind of get creative in how they're able to do that. I mean, I think that's why, like you said, we saw the NCAA approved college football teams to have corporate logos on the field. They're exploring doing the same thing with corporate logos on jersey patches like they have in the NBA and in professional soccer around the world. So I think these are all things that are pretty likely to happen, just to make, like you said, you're going to have to get your revenue up if you're paying these players directly now and not through, collectives and boosters and that kind of thing. So truthfully, like if it's this or it's private equity taking over college football and, running this product that we all love so dearly into the ground and, taking its soul away, like, sure, give me the Globe Life Conference. If that's the binary we're faced with, that's kind of how I feel about it.
Yeah, I agree. Like I'm not a huge fan of the whole private equity. And there's been reports of the Big 12 getting involved in a private equity up to $1 billion in revenue, where they only have to give up 20% of ownership, I guess, of the Big 12 conference itself. Those numbers have been tossed around. Yeah, but I agree. Yeah, I think especially, and I don't know, the Big 12 probably has the best commissioner when it comes to this. About Brett Yormark and where he came from. He's been in the NBA, and he's been a guy in the industry that kind of can broker these kind of deals. And I think for the Big 12, they're going to survive this conference realignment and super conferences. I think that's probably how they're going to have to do it. They're going to have to get creative, and they have. They hosted the they had the WWE WWE sponsored Big 12 title game where they gave away a championship belt. They've done the conference wide pro day. They've done Big 12 International where they're going to go into Mexico and those things. So college sports is changing a lot, and it's starting to look more like a professional league, and that's probably why it's just another option for players who aren't going to get into the Big 12 or get into the NFL right away, maybe stay another year because, hey, I can make some pretty good money at the collegiate level. So, hey, maybe we'll see a lot less opt-outs with all the money that's being tossed around.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I think, like I said, maximizing the revenue is going to be important here. And while, calling it the AllState 12 or the Globe Life Conference might seem a little, weird and on the nose in terms of the advertising. If that's what it takes to keep this product alive when its further professionalization is just kind of inevitable at this point, like if that's what it takes, if getting corporate sponsorships like that is kind of what allows us to stay in this sort of the way it currently works, like, so be it.
Yep. I think that's probably the way it's going to go. So that's going to do it for our show this week. Now, next week, Tyler, I'm excited. We're finally going to dive in. We're going to get to doing some conference previews as we march towards the season. It's hard to believe we're not that far away. As we're closing June out, we have July, and then week 0, Georgia Tech, Florida State, Dublin, Ireland. That's not that far away, and that's just crazy to think. As we're wrapping up the college baseball season, we're in July 1st. Officially get some movement on some of these teams going to their new conferences. Finally getting to see the debut of their new logos and whatnot. But we're going to start in the ACC next week. That's going to be interesting. We got Stanford, California, and SMU. Nothing says coastal like those 3 teams. Well, 2 of them will fit the Pacific Coast, but
yeah,
regardless.
you ready to do your ACC preview by doing some Cal research like we're all used to?
Yeah, I've actually got to go back and look at SMU, which is not far. It's just down the street from me. I probably just go talk to Rhett Lashley and see what I can get out of him. But that's going to do it for this edition of the College 12 Pack. As I said, we'll be back next week talking ACC football. For Tyler, I'm Patrick.